All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to Dougie's Dungeon podcast. Today we have Magnus here, or a bearded magpie from TikTok. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Uh, Hi, I'm Bearded Magpie or Magnus. I've been playing since Pathfinder, and then I've been DMing since the 5e playtest. So quite a bit of experience there, and I'm been trying to build a TikTok following, and then also I'm starting up a Twitch stream that is a like battle royale focused show.
Yeah, and you invited me onto that. I believe I'm excited for that whenever you get it up and
Yeah,
running.
yeah. I think our first episode is going to be next Thursday, but it's it's going to be filmed and recorded on Thursday, and then probably also rebroadcasted on Saturday. So
Well, that'll be fun.
yeah,
So I guess we should get into the first topic, which is combat. How do you make combat more interesting at your table?
at my table, I really try to encourage my players to not just say, "Oh, I attack this character." Um, I'm going to hit the goblin. Okay, uh, roll to hit. It's more, I want you to describe exactly how you're doing it. Like you've already had your weapon readied. So like, where are you targeting this person? Where are you going for the attack? That way it gives it more of a narrative feel to it, so they're more descriptive of how their character is fighting. Um, Especially whenever then once they do roll, you can incorporate that more narratively, say, as opposed to just saying it's like, oh, you hit, or you can then go into say describing how they hit. You cut them across the chest, and um, you can tell that it's a deep wound, and kind of being more narrative and explaining the situation, and less than, oh, you hit, you did this much damage. It keeps combat more lively than just being stats and numbers.
So do you mainly do like theater of the mind combat?
No, we use my group uses Roll20 right now, just because pandemic. We used to play in person, and we would have maps and battle maps and like tokens and things like that. Nothing too extravagant. We don't have full 3D models, um, but we do like the grid base, just because we are a little bit more tactitious in our combat.
Yeah.
So uh, it's hard to do that in theater of the mind.
So chat's asking, do you chat's saying so like no numbers at all? Are you do you use like a lot of numbers in your combat, or do you kind of like try to mitigate a lot of the number bloat in
I
fifth
I
edition?
do, yeah, I do use the numbers still. Um, I I still think numbers are important, um, but I try to make it not just the numbers. Um, I always try to make sure that I know my at least when I am the DM and I'm rolling for damage or I'm rolling to attack. I try to make sure I know my party's AC, and I will let them know like I am hitting at this point. Uh, before I go into describing the attack, especially if they have any type of reactions for like shield, or if they are doing um, their like uncanny dodges or anything like that, because those will factor in and change the narrative. Um, so I still use numbers, but I try to make them not be the focus.
I go the exact opposite. I'm I've like whenever I play a game, I try to go like methodically through a lot of the numbers in the game, and I try to reduce them as much as possible because I hate addition and subtraction. So like I've gone so far as to like for a majority of my games that I run, I've like lately I've been removing like attributes entirely from like all the monsters, all the players. Like they'll still have and like removing modifiers and everything like that. So like they still get like bonuses from their class and everything. But I like it much more whenever what they roll in the die is just what they get, or like the DC is somewhere between 2 and 20. I don't really like increasing it above that. I like keeping my numbers really low.
Mm. I Yeah, I love the stats portion of D&D. I'm a huge theory crafter and like using numbers to my advantage. So I don't want to take it out completely.
Well,
I
yeah, you
just
said you started with 3.5 or Pathfinder, didn't you? That's all
I
numbers and
well
crunch.
well even before that I was a Magic the Gathering player.
Ooh,
So I
yeah.
yeah, so like I am all numbers and crunch, but I understand that that is very very boring for a lot of people. So I try to mitigate that while still keeping it in the game because I think it's important, but then tying it more into the narrative aspect of it as well. So like the numbers are there, but they're covered with narrative and story and all that other like more interesting things to most people.
So, do you do anything to streamline combat at all? Because I feel like if you're using all the numbers and using like all the hit points for all the
Yeah.
monsters, especially with monsters in 5e and how many hit points they have on average, like how are you do you streamline combat? Do you just kind of play combat as it is? Because like me, I'm trying to get combat as quickly as done as possible, you know what I mean?
Um Honestly, I haven't DM'd outside of Roll20 in a very long time. And Roll20 and like other virtual tabletops have made it so much easier to streamline combat. Because I've taught all my players, okay, you get your little, you here's your attacks and everything, and you can set them up to a quick bar. So they don't have to roll, they don't have to do any math. It's just the computer just does it for them, and that has been drastically helpful for reducing the amount of like slog that combat can be. Um, as long as you're keep talking and keeping it interesting, as opposed to physically rolling dice and then trying to math it all out. So that's how I kind of keep it going. I use the virtual tabletops just because the tools are there. Might as well use them.
So you're not going to be able to go back to in
Uh,
person, you think?
I think I probably will be able to. It's just going to be a matter of figuring out how to do it. Like I love my metal dice. I will always use my metal dice when I have the option to. I just think it'll just take a little bit more practice and like trying to tweak what I do currently to get back to the more streamlined aspects of it. But I think it can be done.
So what I do, because I pretty much, I mean, not right now, not currently. Majority of the time, I pretty much exclusively run like in-person games and stuff,
Yeah.
like at game shops. I have a local game shop here, and I run games at my house and stuff. But like pretty much exclusively in-person games. So I don't have that crutch of relying on like hotkeys and like macros for rolling and all that kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of work to streamline the way my combat works. One of the things that I do is like I reduce hit points across the board, like overall.
Hmm.
Um, like players usually will be hovering around 20 hit points, 20 to 25 hit points. Some of the more hardy classes and uh, races will like push that up to about 35. But yeah, that's it. Like players like at level 20 will have 35 hit points. But I do that across the board with everything. So
Yeah.
like a dragon or something like that, that'll always have 50 hit points. Like an adult dragon, 50 hit points no matter what. You know,
So you don't factor in like resistances or anything like that in that case, or do you just kind of like ignore those aspects of those creatures and player characters?
so I personally don't like the way that resistance is handled in 5th edition, how it's just kind of like a advantage or disadvantage. I feel like that kind of it creates like a spiral, death spiral, you know what I mean? Like they have high hit points and then they also have resistances on
Yeah.
top of that, so you're going to be hitting roughly half the time. That's
Yeah.
kind of ridiculous. So I go less that way and more of like just like damage reduction entirely. So like if they have instead of like resistance to magic whatever, it would be like they whatever magic you throw at them is reduced by a certain
Yeah.
amount of damage instead.
Well, like in 5e, it's like if it's a specific damage type resistance, they just take half of that damage.
Yeah,
It's only like magic resistance that they have advantage on saving throws.
yeah. I was on.
Yeah.
I'm like I said. I
Yeah,
don't use fifth edition combat, so
that's fair. Okay. Have you ever played Cyberpunk? Because Cyberpunk's combat system is kind of similar where once they have their starting hit points, they never go up or change. And like combat is extremely lethal. Like any
yeah,
kind of combat can kill someone like in that
that's
game.
actually predominantly where I got my ideas from.
Hmm.
I like that because it speeds up combat super quick. Like everything is really easy to kill. And then another thing that I do is I make it to where the players and the enemies are moving at the same time. So it's basically like a game of chess that I play against the
Okay.
players. So whenever a turn starts, and let's say it's the player's turn, I'll be like, all right, what do you want to do? You have about a minute to, you know, brainstorm amongst yourself with your
Hmm.
party. Like you get to decide what order you guys go in, and then after you guys go and it's your turn, I get to move. And like I get to do all my actions all at once. So all of the monsters and then all of the players move on their own like turns as a group or as a collective.
Okay.
And I've noticed that this also speeds up combat because less turns. And then two
Mhm.
helps them like work through what they want to actually do at the table because if you have one person going and then they plan for one thing but one of the other players kills the monster that they're going to target, well then they got to change what they were going to do.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have them going at the same time, they can communicate, they can work it out. And in the end, like it doesn't really change anything. Both the
Yeah.
enemies are going and the players are going, and the players pay more attention because there's less downtime in between their turn. So they're way more engaged.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. Um, like I kind of like that idea of just the group attack, like everyone up from this side attack. Like you're yeah, everyone is going basically at once. That's actually a really cool idea.
And then
Um,
that allows you to like weave it narratively because
yeah.
they can say like I kind of have it in phases. So basically, uh, I took the idea from Cyberpunk with like how combat and hit points are determined, and then I also stole Matt Colville's like combat phases, where you have the narrative phase, then you have, or sorry, you have the first phase, which is you deciding what you want to do,
Okay.
then or like brainstorming, and then you have the second phase where you announce what you're going to do. And then you have the third phase where I, as a dungeon master, narrate what actually happens in what turn in what
Okay.
order. And so, like, it's super easy to be like, all right, cool, we're going to do the combat phase, and then we're going to do the narrative phase, and then I'm going to
Mm.
describe everything that happens in this turn, and then it's going to be the enemy's turn. Then I'm going to describe everything that happens in the enemy's turn, and then it's your turn to brainstorm what do you want to do with this information you have. So it's like super quick, super cyclical, and
Yeah.
combats don't last any time at all.
Oh, yeah. Um, have you had much experience with the Powered by the Apocalypse games or any of those? Because they're almost entirely narrative based, and like that's kind of like how it is. Like you describe what you're gonna do. The game master then just says, "Okay, here's your special role that you do," and it's always 2d6, no matter what. And then based upon that, they narrate the results. Like, and then the interesting in that system is though that the monster or whatever you're fighting usually does not have any sort of turn of its own. It is purely like reacting to what you do as the players.
Chat's saying I love reactionary monsters. So I don't know. So my relationship with Powered by the Apocalypse is kind
Mhm.
of like I kind of sit on the fringes and I take
Yeah.
whatever I find interesting. I'm not a huge fan of the lack of structure with Powered by the Apocalypse games. I don't like the different rule set to different setting kind of
Mm,
mentality. I like to have like a backbone or a framework to work
yeah.
from. And so I kind of steer away from Powered by the Apocalypse, but I am like, absolutely willing to steal things from it that I enjoy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. There's a quote. It's like something about good artists creates and like great artists steal or something like that.
I
But
someone is Matt Coviel. He said something like, I don't know if it's the same reference that you're talking about,
yeah.
Matt Coviel, but Matt Coviel said the measure of a great dungeon master is the obscurity of the things they steal from. And
Yeah.
honestly, that's the way to go about it. You know,
Yeah.
if your players don't know you're stealing it, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I stole pretty much the entire campaign based on local folklore, and I don't think my party ever realized it.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So the last campaign I ran, it started off being folklore inspired. I love folklore and like local stories. I think they're an amazing source for Dungeons and Dragons tabletop games in general because it's always cool and unique to the area that you're from. So my background is I grew up here in the Ozark Mountains, and we have just loads and loads of folklore, folk monsters, tales of like we have one of the largest vigilante groups back in like the 1800s Civil War era. Like and
Interesting.
so yeah, and so there's and so there's just tons of resources that you can use and put into your game. Um, like one of the first encounters I ever did, actually was the very first encounter and how I got the party together. Was based on an event in my city called the Cobra Scare. The real story is that uh, a pet shop had illegally obtained a bunch of cobras in town, and they accidentally got loose throughout the city. And everyone was freaking out for like a week because there was a whole bunch of venomous cobras just loose in the city.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. I wouldn't leave. I either wouldn't leave the house or I wouldn't
Yeah,
trust staying in my house, so I'd leave the city.
they found there's a bunch of different stories about how they apprehended all the cobras, but one of my favorite ones was they found one underneath this woman's crawl space of her house, and the sheriff just ended up firing like 8 rounds into this crawl space before eventually hitting it, um, and pulling it out. So I kind of use that story as like one of my the introduction of uh like of how they all met because I just had them all be in the town marketplace when the cobras were released and they had to defend the city from the cobras. And so that's kind of like how they all met and how they came together. Um, but I tried to incorporate the vigilante group. I had them being like founding members of it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to finish that storyline just because like my party is very much like we want to do something for a little while and then we kind of get bored and we just end it so on an arc. So I just kind of ended the main arc before continuing on to that next one where it would have really come into fruition. But um,
So Chad is asking, how do we find our local lore for our local areas? A lot of stuff can be hard to just Google. So how do you go about finding all of these like local legends or local myths? Like, do you go to local library? Do you just kind of Google things? Do
um,
you Is it the stories you grew up with?
yeah, it's actually a combination of all of that. Libraries are a great resource for local folklore. Oftentimes you can find a book written by someone in the area talking about the stories of the area. Um, I also just things that I heard growing up. Like there's another like part of town that we called the albino farm, and there's a bunch of different rumors and legends all about that. So like I use that for inspiration for a section of the game. Um, and then like online, it it can be hard to Google, just because you have to know exactly what you're looking for.
Especially for local lore.
Yeah. But really, your local library, if you have like a town history museum, like surely like talk to people. Like if you grew up in the area, it's a lot easier because like you always hear those stories as kids, like something happened over in this area, and wild stories spin out of control and they keep getting retold and retold and retold, which is all folklore is. It's just these. these stories that might have had a grain of truth to them just being retold and exaggerated each time you tell it.
So how do you go about, like, you have these like local monsters and these local legends and everything? Like how do you go about assigning them a CR, or do you just kind of give them abilities and ignore CR?
Uh,
Because that's really
I
important pertaining to combat,
Yeah, it is. Um, I mean, I homebrewed so much for that game, for that campaign. Um,
I'd imagine.
oh, yeah, a lot of it was um, really it was like I used the CR calculator on 5e tools. That was one of the biggest things I used for calculating CR, trying to make it a match for my party. Like, but balancing anything for that party was near impossible because we ended up creating a super healer class basically on like with they were nearly impossible to kill. But so balancing just went out the window and I just fudged everything. But uh,
I'm kind of curious, like, what did you do to make an unkillable healer?
so it was Circle of the Stars Druid, who gets their chalice form, and so they get bonus healing off of that, and they were also a multi-class into Life Cleric. So they were getting bonus healing from Life Cleric, just because they get +2 per spell level for whatever spell they use, and then the Circle of Stars Druid gets an ability whenever they cast a spell that heals. It does, they get to heal someone else within 30 feet that they can see, a d8 plus their wisdom modifier on top of that as well. So, as a bonus action, they could healing word two people for an absurd amount of health. So, and
See,
then we also had a Twilight Cleric who gave everyone a d8 plus their level 10 hit points every turn.
that is precisely why I have kind of gone away from allowing like allowing players to multi-class, because
Mm,
for like most people,
yeah.
multi-classing is like a way to like just like get a little bit more power. It's
Yeah.
all about power gaming when people want to
Well,
multi-class. Like I can understand it if it's like a narrative thing, like you were a paladin and then you lost your faith and you
yeah.
wanted to go into something else. But like that's
The
never the case
yeah.
for anyone.
Actually, that's the thing though. This character was pure narrative. We found out those rulings after the fact. um like the character's like parents, her parents were a life cleric and a Circle of Stars druid, and she just followed in their footsteps. And so like it was pre-written lore before we ever even really dug into the rules, before she even actually multi-classed.
Hmm.
So it just was a fluke. It was, yeah. It was like one of those things where I messaged the player and I was like, hey, you know this is broken, right?
Yeah, we got to do
And he was
something
like,
else.
he was like, and we were already like 3 sessions in, and he was like, no, but okay, I can use that. But I'm always one of those DMs like, my party wants to feel powerful, I'll let them feel powerful. I'm not gonna try to take that from them.
So I kind of do a little bit of both. Like I'll let them like feel powerful for a while. Like I said, I don't
Yeah,
allow multi-classing at my table, so I don't really
yeah,
have to worry about that. Um, but I'll definitely allow players, like if they're steamrolling things for a while, I'll let them do it. Like that's when they're gonna have fun. But
yeah,
I also like to rein it back in every once in a while, because then if you're steamrolling everything, then
yeah. I
and
mean, yeah. Yeah, I did end up doing a TPK though. That was, but it was planned. Like I totally did purposefully and intentionally kill the entire party, and then I took away actually all their healing while they were dead. So I
like you're too powerful for too long. You're done now. No more.
well, basically it was part of the story that I had them die, so they could find out the big bad evil guy's like true name. So in order to do that, they had to go to hell.
Oh,
So
okay, I see.
they didn't know that they needed that, so I just kind of killed them. They thought they were going to the final fight, and I was like, "Nope." Uh,
Rocks fall, everyone dies.
yeah. And then while they were in the underworld, I actually said healing magic doesn't work down here because you don't have a physical body to heal. So
That's interesting. I've done similar things like whenever players get up to like astral projection, I'll be like this like whenever you die in the astral projection form or whatever, you just go right back to your real body. Like
mm,
you can't heal here. So like no
yeah,
long rest. So what hit points you have when you start your astral projection, that's it. That's all
yeah.
you got until you run out of it.
I was a little bit more generous than that. I said they could still rest and heal because their spirits would rest as well. Um,
Well, astral
and then
projection is a little bit different than
yeah,
that.
it is. Yeah. And then instead of dying outright if they hit zero in the underworld, they would actually go, once they hit zero, they'd go back up to full health and gain a point of exhaustion that just doesn't go away.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was kind of like a mechanic to like, so I could literally dish out as much damage possible without actually having to worry about truly killing them. Um, and it was kind of like the idea, the narratively was to kind of show that as they take damage in this form, their soul starts to like break a little bit piece by piece as they take more significant damage. So
So do you I kind of wanted to like work that back into
yeah.
like what we're talking with combat and everything. So like in your like when they went to hell or whatever, were there
Mhm.
any like interesting environmental effects that you use? Because that's I use environmental effects in almost every combat, like in some way or another, either like timers for certain things, or players can activate or cause an environmental effect, or there's an active environmental effect happening. Do you do anything like that in your games?
Uh, Not so much. This is like like this last campaign that I ran was one of the first ones I ran in a little while. So like I was mostly still trying to get back in the swing of things, and so I didn't add too many timers. I didn't add too many other effects to the game. I was more focused on telling a good story at that point. Um, so that I didn't include those. And looking back, I definitely feel like I should have to like add more to it. Um, but I mean, hindsight is always 2020. So
Yeah, and we're always like dungeon masters are always honing their craft. Like if you're not
yeah,
honing your craft, what are you doing?
yeah,
But so yeah, I completely understand that. But like just if I could go on a tangent about
yeah.
timers and environmental effects just for the listeners. Um like definitely if you're listening or whatever, um definitely start including environmental effects or timers into your game, or both actually. Specifically in combat, but you can do it outside of combat with like chases and everything like that, and maybe we can in a different podcast episode I can go more into detail about how to run chases. But like whenever you're running combat, it's always more interesting whenever you have other things that can happen in the room that you're in, like as your players or whatever. So if like you're in a keep, or like interacting with any like location that has like chandeliers, allowing them to be cut down and then to maybe start a fire on the rug, and then the rug, that's now an environmental hazard that every turn or every round, it spreads further. Or like a timer where the players have to get to the big bad evil guy before they have a summoning go off, and if they don't get there in a certain amount of rounds, and the summoning goes off, and then the combat becomes harder because they got to deal with the summon and the big bad evil guy.
So with new run timers, do you let them know there is a timer going, or do you or do you just like keep it hidden from them in the non-obvious situations, like if the big bad evil guy wakes up or things like that?
It depends. It depends on the type of timer. If it's something that the players can like absolutely see or like know is happening, like for instance, like they know that the big bad evil guy is summoning a monster, and if one of the players is like a wizard and they can identify what the big bad evil guy is doing, then I'll let them know like, oh, this summoning is almost like it's almost gone off. Like we have very little time, maybe like 1 or 2 rounds. Like I have no, I'm not a huge stickler on metagaming in that regard because if your players know that there is a timer, then they are automatically gonna become more stressed. And that's what you want. You want to stress out your players a little bit. So letting them know isn't such a big deal, even if it's quote unquote supposed to be a secret, because
Mhm.
then they're gonna play. If they don't know there's a timer, then they're not gonna play
Yeah.
into there being a timer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I did incorporate like a few in that game, not a ton. One of the big ones I did though was they were on the fourth floor of a burning mansion and they had to escape before the entire thing fell in. And so that was kind of like an obvious timer that I had put on, and I still had them work in turn order and move through the mansion as the fire spread, and I gave the fire a turn to spread around and block paths and things like that. But um, that was kind of an obvious timer that I've used, and I kind of liked the urgency it gave them because
Yeah.
they knew that if they didn't get out soon, they were very obviously going to die because they couldn't loot the mansion anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really the point. And allowing your players to know like gives them that urgency, and then they'll play into it. Like obviously, it's always an issue whenever you have like one of your players no sell something, but
Yeah,
like letting them know like, hey, if you don't do this, your character is gonna die. I guarantee you that's gonna change their tone a little bit.
yeah.
But
Well, like it was funny because I had one character in the burning mansion who was trying to loot the mansion. Like they were a artificer and they were going through all of the books in the library, throwing them out the window as fast as they could. And they eventually got trapped in that room until they themselves just jumped out the window of the third floor. And I had to like, okay, let's roll fall damage. Let's see if you go unconscious.
what level were they?
I think they were level 3 or 4 at that point.
So that
Um,
definitely could have taken out like
oh yeah,
3d6 fall damage. That definitely could have knocked someone unconscious
yeah,
or
and
outright killed them if under the right circumstances.
this is post like boss battle.
Yeah, definitely then.
Yeah, they
So
got very lucky.
So, what are your thoughts on CR as a whole?
um, I kind of have complicated views of CR. Like, I think that CR is kind of a good starting point, but I don't think it should be like gospel by any means. Um, I think CR is like better just used as a guideline of like here's how to like here's a vague idea of how much like of what a general four-person party should be able to handle.
Yeah, a general guesstimation.
Yeah, like, but I mean, there's so many other factors that you have to figure in that it's not going to that you can't just go solely based on that. There's always going to be a lot of guesswork involved. So I think it's a good starting point, but I don't think it is. I I don't want to say it's like, oh, if you just match the CR, you're fine. Like,
I kind of
uh,
go the opposite way because I really dislike. I feel like if you start using CR and you like use that as like uh, a litmus test for what your players can handle, I feel like you are so restricted narratively because like there's only so many CR2 monsters in the book
yeah,
in the monster manual. There's only a certain number of CR1s or there's only a certain amount of CR of any given CR level, at a time. So I completely, absolutely, and completely ignore CR entirely. I don't care about CR. I don't care if my players wouldn't like. I will, throw an adult dragon at my players at 5th level, something that they normally wouldn't be able to handle at all at that level.
mhm,
But when I throw things in front of my players, I've kind of talked about this and touched on this before. Whenever I throw things at my players, it's not necessarily for them to just outright kill it or attack it at that given moment. Like it's for them to interact with however they choose. And if that is to attack it, then that's one breath attack away from a bad day. But
yeah,
but like allowing yourself or like not restricting yourself to CR, especially if you're a new dungeon master, like definitely be careful with what you're putting in front of them. And you can't do this normally, if you're just using all of the rules as they're written, like you got to do some like like myself, I lowered the hit points of everything across the board.
Yeah.
I beat it into my player's head like combat is not the only way. You can solve these
Yeah.
situations in other ways. But yeah, I feel like CR really restricts new dungeon masters, especially because they have these stories that they want to tell. They want to throw these certain monsters in them, but then they see the CR and they're like, I can't do that. That'll kill them. So
Well, that's I don't I don't necessarily think that like using CR is a bad thing in those situations, but you don't have to use the CR monsters printed in the book. Of the CR of the monster printed in the book. Like if you want to throw a dragon at your party like and have them fight it, I would say just take the narrative aspects of a dragon and drop its stats and have them fight that if you want them to fight it. And like I totally get like and I love the idea of giving them things that maybe they're not supposed to fight. Like uh and having them interact with things in different ways that are way well above their level. But if you do want them to fight something at level 2 that normally in the book would kill them, just make it weaker. That's
yeah,
my big thing.
that plays like directly into one of the aspects of what I do for my monsters is like I'll make excuses, for the monster. This is kind of like a metagame thing. Like as I'm structuring adventures or whatever, like every time you come across like a dragon, because let's just use that. We have that
Yeah.
example going. Like every time you run into a dragon, like that dragon could be already wounded, and so their hit
Hmm.
points could be already drastically lower than they would normally, and so they would be able to take on a dragon, or like, you know, instead of fudging dice, because I don't fudge dice, I let the dice roll like fall where they may.
Hmm.
I will adjust stats like behind the screen. Players can't see it, it's fine, but I'll just be like, yeah, this dragon was weakened from a previous fight that it had. Well, what
Hmm.
fought the dragon? Well, then that plays like directly into the narrative of like, what else is out there that we got to be worried about, because if
Hmm.
it's screwing up this dragon pretty good and we're able to now take on this dragon, well, what is that thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Um yeah, you mentioned something about fudging dice, and like I fudge dice all the time. I fully admit that, but I don't ever do it in against the party. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense. Yeah, like I usually fudge things in their favor, except if like something ends up being I miscalculate horribly and it ends up being too easy. I usually just like let's give them an infinite health pool until I get them to a point where I want.
Well,
But
that's honestly the approach that I would much rather people take, because fudging dice, like wherever you feel about it, like, it's your table, you do whatever you want. Like, I'm not
yeah,
criticizing anyone who decides to fudge dice. I've fudged dice. Anyone who says that they haven't is a liar. Like, everyone fudges dice at some point as
yeah,
a dungeon master. I just largely try to avoid it now because I
yeah,
know of better ways to handle the situation instead of, you know, I kind of go into it with the mentality of if I don't want a random result, I won't let the players roll. Like if I want
okay,
a random thing to happen, then that's when I have them roll. If I don't want it to be random and if I just want a specific result, I don't allow them to roll. I
hmm,
just, narratively, this is what happens. That's it. That's the end of it.
yeah,
And this prevents like the need for fudging dice, in my opinion. And then everything else, like if it pertains to a monster, is behind the screen and only adjusting stats. Like I won't like if the monster hits, it hits because it's the, I should also mention that I do a player facing system, and so the
ooh,
players are actually the ones rolling to dodge the enemy attacks.
okay. So do you do like a roll v roll type situation?
No, a player facing system is basically where it's always assumed that the monster hits. Like whenever
Okay.
you have a like dragon or whatever, it's going to use its breath attack. It's going to hit no matter what.
Hmm.
The players dodge though. So
Yeah.
if it's making a swipe, the players dodge. It's not like a roll versus roll. It's more of like there's a DC to hit, and your players' armor class that they're trying to, they roll their
Yeah.
own attacks or whatever. They have to hit a target number, and the monster's bonus is a negative to the player's roll. If that makes any sense. there's no way I can really kind of show you unless I
Yeah.
pulled up a chart. But if you
Yeah.
just look up player facing systems, there's charts
Okay.
on how to calculate it and everything. But yeah, it's one, it
I was like, that almost sounds
significantly,
like THACO.
no, it's like a
Yeah.
THACO light.
Yeah.
Very, very reduced in like different numbers. It's, it's based off of the
Yeah.
AC, so it's really easy. It's not like this arbitrary number that
Yeah.
changes with level.
Yeah.
Chad is asking, when
Yeah.
you do fudge dice, should it be transparent or keep it behind the screen?
Uh, for me, I keep it behind the screen, but I don't fudge dice to like an extreme extent. Usually, if I fudge a dice roll, it's like I rolled a critical hit, and I don't want that player to die because I don't have a narratively interesting way to make them die. Um,
Well,
like,
wouldn't the character's death just be the narrative significance anyway?
uh,
Like they died
yes,
in this combat, like that's the narrative
yeah.
significance. So,
Uh,
do you just
I
largely try to avoid character death in general?
I try to avoid character death unless there's a specific purpose for it. Um, I think like character death can be impactful and it should be impactful. I just don't want my characters to die in a random encounter they on the side of the road. That's like usually when I try to avoid it. If they're fighting like a boss or anything like that, I don't fudge those crits. If they die during a boss fight, they die during a boss fight. It's those types of things. Where will these uh like it's one of those like do I want them to be do I want them to die in a battle that was designed to like deplete resources, or do I want them to die in a battle that is for narrative significance? If that makes any sense.
No, it does. It definitely, does make sense. But I have just I have the complete opposite ideology. I mean, obviously, I communicate with my players beforehand. That I'm a particularly deadly DM, and I don't really pull any punches when it comes to that. But um, I feel personally that a player, like, let's say it is a random encounter and they're traveling
Mhm.
to the big bad evil guy, that's the narrative significance. Like, that is, like, if they, like, one of their party members died on the way to the big bad evil guy to fight them, well, then that gives the big bad evil guy time to, like, move locations. And then, like, that's the narrative significance, and that
Yeah.
changes the way the game is played. And, like, whether it's random or not doesn't really
Yeah.
matter to me.
Yeah. I've just had a couple of bad experiences where like not only my character, but I've seen other party members' characters just die alongside the road. And it was just like, well, okay, we like and it like there was no reincorporating that into the story, or it was just they were dead, let's move on. And like,
Really?
yeah.
Like, you have clerics that can bring people back to life, and no one
we
thinks
were
to.
yeah, we were low enough level that we didn't have money or resources for a revival.
But there are still, like, if
Yeah.
I'm the dungeon master running the game, like, if a player character dies, like, I'm gonna make ways, like, it doesn't make sense. You're in control
Yeah.
of the narrative. Like, you can make ways to be like, all right, yeah, we'll revive you, but you have to perform services for us now. Like, we got to pay off your debt. And then now you have a whole storyline about paying off your debt to the church.
Yeah,
Especially if, you have a cleric in the party, to hold them accountable for it.
we didn't quite get that. We had, I think, 3 or 4 player characters die before level 4. And so that's why I was like, I try to so that's why I just kind of like try to avoid player death unless it is for a very distinct purpose, just because like that experience kind of left a bad taste in my mouth.
I can get that. Would you ever, mm, would you ever go back to, I guess, kind of like a frivolous fly by the seat of your pants methodology when it comes to character death? Or are you kind of like, from this point on, like, you're going to try and avoid character death?
Um it I think it would depend on the type of game I'm running. Um if I'm going for a very like narrative based game, I would probably try to avoid character death, especially if like the narrative of the game ends up being like, oh hey, these four are the chosen ones. um,
I don't ever run games like that. I'm always
oh
like,
okay,
you're level one, you're a weed. Like you gotta make yourself, you
yeah,
gotta make a name for yourself, you know?
yeah, yeah. Like, but if we were doing like a dungeon crawl, like if we were going to be doing Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I'd be like, death here, death there. Just find a new party member outside of town.
Yeah, chat saying gets replaced by identical cousin.
Yeah.
Or like Tomb of Annihilation is good for that
Yeah.
too. Like if you just want to like
Yeah.
just a slog of a dungeon to get through, like you're going.
Yeah.
The way I've run Tomb of Annihilation is, I can't remember. It was like the side-scrolling game where you every time you died, it was like roguelite. So every time you died, it was your
Oh,
basically the next
Rogue
generation.
Legacy.
Rogue Legacy.
I love that game.
I run Tomb of Annihilation. Like it's it's a big, huge
Yeah.
dungeons and everything like that, and like everyone's trying to excavate it, and you're like part of like all of the adventures at my party are like a family organization of adventures, and
Yeah.
so every time they go in the dungeon and when their character dies, it's like all right, a month later, it's your or like a couple years later, it's
Yeah.
your son or something like that.
Uh, no, I love that game. Yeah, I should definitely incorporate some of that into my next campaign.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
Uh,
But yeah, because for me, like combat. So the way I look at it, like specifically from like a combat narrative thing,
mhm.
is like combat should only be to the death.
Yeah.
Like let me rephrase that because it kind of goes
Mhm.
against what I've said before. Like I differentiate like life and death combat and like regular combat. Like usually when my players are engaging in things, like I tell them like, "Hey, you don't have to kill these things." And most of the time things that are going to engage in combat with you aren't going to just outright kill you. Like it doesn't make any sense. You're way more valuable to be
Yeah.
ransomed off or captured and sold or something like that. Like
Mhm.
there's other ways to deal with unconscious characters other than just killing them and leaving them where they lie.
Yeah.
And so like I tell my players like whenever you engage in combat, it shouldn't always be to the death, but whenever like combat is real combat, it
Mhm.
should be to the death. And so if you
Mhm.
mess up, you die, that's the consequences for engaging in combat.
Mhm. I try to give the when like regular combat, like that's not like the big narrative climax. I try to more just create um the illusion of death and dismemberment, I guess. So like I know as a DM that they are not going to die here, but I want them to maybe feel like they might. So I would like that's why I say is like a lot of my enemies will have an infinite health pool until they get to a certain point. So like until I've done enough damage, like I've brought the cleric down to zero, or I have like depleted their resources where they feel like they're going to die, and then I basically like then I let the thing they're fighting collapse after they get to those points. So I try to create more the illusion of death and danger than actually death and danger, like than actually just being like, well, there is real death and danger. If that make yeah.
Yeah. So do you run more like I guess a hero's story kind of like I guess like the grand tale, like Lord of the Rings or something like that? Do you do
Yeah,
like the grand adventure kind of stories where everyone's the main character?
yeah, that's what I generally try to do. Like in the last campaign that I ran, it was basically the overarching plot line was this demon that was sealed away like 50 years ago was now coming back out, and the party were actually the descendants of the people who sealed him away the first time.
Okay.
So it was kind of like that, like you guys are the ones who have to do it because it is your parents who did it the first time type situation.
See, I run games more in like regards to like your adventures in this world, and if you want to make a name for yourself, you can. But there are also other adventures in the world that, like, if the players don't focus on the big bad evil guy, there'll be
Mhm.
someone to take up like take up the fight. You know, there's always
Yeah,
someone in the world. Like, I never have it where my players are the center of the universe. I know that
mhm.
kind of counterintuitive to how the game is portrayed, but
Yeah,
I definitely like running games where and that allows actually for more opportunity for players to die and then pick up
yeah,
another adventure because they're not the chosen ones, they're just one of they're part of the adventurers guild, like there's going to
yeah.
be more of them and you can just pick up another one after your funeral service and then you're like, all right, well, we got another mission to go on, so stop by the guild and pick up somebody else. So I kind of run
Yeah,
those types of games more often, so I can see your hesitation to like have combat to the death or to engage in that kind of deadly behavior as a dungeon master. So I understand it,
yeah.
is what I'm saying, but
Oh yeah,
I just
and
don't like it.
that's fair. That's fair. Like everyone has different play styles.
Yeah.
And like I'm not necessarily fully opposed to the death and people dying. It's just the stories that I like to tell and the stories that my party likes to play have a tendency to be those more like we are the chosen ones type stories where they feel like they are the world's only hope. And so uh, that makes it a little bit harder narratively to justify a player death.
Well, one thing that I have done is whenever the play, like, I've only done this a couple times previously, but one of the things that I've done is like when people are killed on the material plane, they obviously go to some place else. Like their soul leaves the material
Yeah.
plane and it goes to one of the other spheres of influence. So one of the things that I've done is when I've had narrative stories like that, I just split the party. So the
Mhm.
character's dead, like their body is dead, but their
Yeah.
soul has gone to wherever it should be. Depending on what kind of character you're playing, and then
Yeah.
the players have to go get them, and or like
Mhm.
so. Not only are the players having to try and go get their dead friend, the dead friend is also trying to get to the party, and so
Yeah.
I split the party and have like this split narrative thing where the soul of the dead party member is doing everything in their power to get like back and close to the gates of wherever realm that they end up being sent to when they die, and then the players have to like it just sets off their course, like they can't just focus on the main story, like this is now a side mission that they have to go get
Yeah.
their chosen friend from, because like name any like Supernatural for example, like I don't know if you've ever seen that show,
I watched up to season 5 and then I quit.
but how many times have Sam and Dean died in that show and been brought back
Yeah.
to life?
An
Like,
absurd amount. Yeah.
but they're the main characters. Like, that's
Yeah.
the type of story it is. And so
Yeah.
you can get away with that kind of behavior. So,
Yeah.
like, if I ever do run games like, where it's very narrative heavy like yours, I would honestly go that way instead more often than not.
Like, and I kind of did that a little bit, except I didn't split the party. I just killed them all and then had them
Oh.
fight their way out of the underworld. And I took
One of you
heavy
dies, you all
inspiration.
die.
Yeah, and I kind of took heavy inspiration from like the Mythic Odyssey of Theros book for that storyline where they were brought over the river Styx and like the Greek mythology aspect of death in the underworld. Um,
Yeah, another example that you could use for like the player that's in hell or players that are in hell or not particularly hell, but like anywhere
yeah,
else, um, is have you ever played the game Hades? It's like a roguelite
I have
where
not, but I really want to.
oh, it's really good. First of all, anyone who's
Yeah,
listening or watching this, like, go get the game. It's amazing if you
yeah,
like roguelites. But like that character's Zagreus is the son of Hades, and he's trying to leave Hades. He's trying to go,
Mhm.
to surface world so he can go hang out
Yeah.
with the other gods on Olympus.
Mhm.
But like taking that, like I had the inspiration before that, but like that's a perfect example of how to like split the party. That party
Yeah.
member that died is Zagreus trying to get to the surface,
Mhm.
and the party members is like I don't know, Sam, Dean, and Castiel trying to go to hell to save, pull their soul
Yeah.
back to bring them back to life or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Something crazy ridiculous.
yeah.
Rescue him from Satan's eviler brother.
Yeah. So we only got about 5 minutes left. So I wanted
Yeah.
to close this on probably what's going to be our most controversial topic.
Okay.
What is the class you hate the most?
Ooh.
I know you've kind of mentioned Monk a little bit, but I want you to go into like good good detail as why you have a hatred for a specific class.
Um. I always use Monk as an example, um, just because I feel like it's just not as good of a fighter. Like, and let me
What are
explain
you
because
talking? Yeah, what you better
so
explain this. Doesn't make any sense.
so their damage die is so low. It's just it and yes, it scales, but most games aren't going to get to a point where it scales to a point where it's actually
Pat, like
good.
by the time
Like,
the damage is like on
yeah,
par with a long sword or like a great sword
yeah,
or something, like it's
and they're frontline fighters. They're primarily designed to be frontline fighters, except they have a D8 of health. They have no real ways of mitigating damage. Um, and then if they want to disengage and get out of combat, they have to use their bonus action. But they also need their bonus action to do their unarmed strike, their second unarmed strike, or their flurry of blows. Both
what?
require their bonus action.
I was unaware that that was a.
Yeah.
I'm not a player, so I don't ever like really
Mhm.
engage with the
Yeah.
actual classes, but
They do get a second attack at fifth level, but so does the fighter. But in order to use any of their extra attacks like at level one, that requires a bonus action.
yeah,
So
and the fighter has action surge, which is kind of the same thing. I get it.
so they are just they don't have like they have to get in there and then they have to get out or they're toast.
So
But they can't both. And they do have some crowd control effects, but they're not that great. Except for stunning strike, which is still a DC save, but you have to be pretty lucky because your DC save isn't going to be super high as a monk.
so do you
Because
just hate the monk from 5th edition or do you just hate the monk in general?
just the monk in fifth edition,
Okay.
like I absolutely loved the monk in Pathfinder.
Oh yeah. That they were
uh,
nasty in Pathfinder.
because
Oof.
you could literally just avoid an attack whenever you wanted in
Deflect
Pathfinder.
arrows, catch arrows, deflect
Yeah,
bullets. Like you could do
and
anything. It was impossible to hit a
yeah,
monk in Pathfinder.
and like the monk in 5e, they can do a catch arrow catch, but they can only stop one because it requires their reaction. They're just so um dependent on bonus action and reaction to be good that they can't do the things that they're actually supposed to be good at. And then now that they have the unarmed fighting style for fighter, you can just go battle master fighter with unarmed fighting style and be a better monk.
With less mobility, but yeah.
Yeah, with less mobility, but most arenas and setups aren't going to really require you to have a ton of mobility anyways,
And that's
especially if
on the dungeon master
that is.
realistically, but I
Yeah,
get what you're saying.
because like I could be a centaur, a centaur monk, battle master unarmed fighting fighter and just gallop around the battlefield punching things willy-nilly and be able to heal and be able to do crowd control effects and get more attacks a turn.
So the class that I hate, and it's not like from a player's perspective, it's specifically from a dungeon master's perspective.
No,
I absolutely hate running games with druids in them.
really.
Absolutely. They are like so if you have an average like druid player,
Yeah.
it's manageable. But when you
Mhm.
have a druid player who knows how to play druid, your game is ruined. Like there's nothing you can throw at them. Like the just druids in general, like the concept of a druid, like
Yeah.
from all editions have been druids have always been really powerful. I mean, they have all 9 levels of casting. They
Yeah.
have the ability to shape change, and in some editions they can actually cast spells while they're in their
Yeah.
changed animal form or whatever. So like you're talking about a complete switch hitter
Yeah.
that can sling spells just as good as the wizard. They may not have access to like some of the spells that
Mhm.
really make wizards powerful and everything, but they got some really good ones up there. So they're
Hey,
slinging
they didn't
spells.
give Wildfire Druid Fireball, so we're good.
Yeah. But like you have these characters that, there's an animal like pretty much every single one of my games whenever I have a druid in them, I have to start nerfing them in order to have like a narratively sound story because like just think of any situation that could be solved by just turning into a specific animal. They need a
Yeah.
reconnaissance. Like you don't need a diviner wizard for reconnaissance. Absolutely not. I'm just gonna turn into like a little bug and just like a fly and you know go bother and be literally a fly on the wall in the room that you need to spy on, or you need a frontline tank. All right, well I'm just gonna turn into a bear with bark skin, you
It
know.
sounds like you have more of an issue with the Moon Druid than druids as a whole.
Well, I'm talking about like
Yeah.
druids across any system.
Yeah. That's true.
I'm not talking about like fifth edition specifically.
That's fair.
Um, just the concept of a
Yeah.
druid is overpowered. Like everyone thinks wizards are the most powerful. I completely disagree. Druids are the sleeper hitters. Like they're the ones that are going to actually ruin your game. A wizard is just going to fireball everything and just like teleport around and make make the structure of your game kind of useless. Whereas you could throw anything in front of a druid and they're going to have a way to solve it. Whereas a wizard won't in most instances. Like a wizard has to like summon other oh, and druids can also summon other monsters like a
Yeah,
wizard
they
can.
can. Yeah.
So
And they added in the new summon spells in fifth edition too that just make it really, really busted.
yeah, so not only can you turn into a monster, you can summon a monster, and you have an animal companion, and you can sling spells. Like, what can't they do compared to a wizard who can do like two of those things well at once?
Yeah. I
Absolutely
honestly
not.
I think the paladin is currently the strongest class in the game, but uh that's just because they can do everything. They literally can just do everything, and with their smiting abilities and
Chat's saying the
uh,
same thing.
yeah, uh, yeah, with their smiting abilities and the fact that they get the aura of protection, which gives everyone around them benefits to saving throws based upon their charisma modifier. So I mean, you can have an entire party who has +5 to every save.
So I actually, what I've started doing is I don't normally use alignment,
Hmm.
but one way that I do use alignment is specifically for paladins. That aura ability that they have, like their
Yeah.
bonus to saves, if you're not within one step of the paladin for alignment,
Mhm.
then you do not benefit from the paladin's aura because that doesn't make sense. Like if you're a chaotic evil character and you're dealing with a lawful good, like first of all, they shouldn't be in the party together
Yeah.
in the first place. But even if that circumstance does happen, it won't work because I just don't let it work unless they're within one step of the paladin's alignment.
That's probably a good way to balance it for
Yeah.
sure.
That way,
Because
you'll have a couple people in the party that have the bonus and everything like
yeah,
that. But that's really gonna make your make your rogue mad. Gotta be a good
neutral
guy to.
paladin.
But I mean, that's the whole point of the paladin, isn't it? To like be a zealot and try and convert everyone else.
It depends on their oath now because the
Yeah.
oaths are so different. So because like they really revolutionized Paladin in fifth edition to make it not so.
Same thing with Pathfinder Second Edition. They call it the Champion now.
Yeah,
Much, much, much better than Paladin. But
I have not gone into Pathfinder second edition. I did not like it that much upon reading the rules. I was like, this seems tedious.
the only contention I have is the number bloat specifically with the skill system. The
Mm,
adding your, I'm pretty sure, I think they may have changed it. I was looking at it earlier. I couldn't find it, but I'm pretty sure I knew, especially with the playtest, because I had both the playtest and the first printing. The
yeah.
skills you added your level plus your modifiers plus whatever you rolled. So like
I thought,
DCs would like constantly like a legendary DC, like
yeah,
your ceiling is a DC 40, whereas I feel like DC should be around 20. Like your max DC should be around 20. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's and the way they worked proficiency in that system, I think was also just a little extreme. Like having four levels of proficiency.
5, I
At
think.
five.
Untrained, trained, expert, master, legendary.
Yeah, and then you always add your level. I was like,
Yeah.
it would have like I think the 5e system of just your generalized proficiency bonus is very, very nice compared to previous editions of like the base attack bonus or um and like all the myriad of different saves that you would have to keep track of.
Yeah. So what I'm actually doing from my own TTRPG that I'm working on is I make skills just a thing like you basically when you unlock a skill, you unlock the ability to roll that skill. And so the
Mm,
DC always is like a DC 20 is the max. Like that's really hard DC.
yeah,
So like the average DC is going to be 10. So whatever you roll, like if you roll a higher than 10 on the dice, then you're more likely to succeed. You know, some things are really easy, so DC 5, that kind of stuff. But what I'm doing in my TTRPG is like I'm making it to where, like for instance, something that it's really funny to me, maybe not to everyone else, but I have literacy different from like it's a skill that you have to have. Like you have to
yeah,
unlock that skill. So like wizards, like they study, so they have literacy. They can read and write, but a fighter, they can't. They have to learn it. And
yeah,
then only once they and then so it's basically like spheres of influence with the skills. So like whenever you unlock literacy as a skill, now you can make checks on deciphering language. So if it's a language you don't know, that increases the DC. If it's like
hmm,
a and so you're just rolling based off of like whether you have the skill or not, not what numbers you have in the skill, like how many points you have into it
yeah.
because I don't like that.
So you just can't do the thing if you're not proficient in it.
Yeah, that's how I'm doing it in my system. But that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah.
But
It makes me think of Always Sunny in Philadelphia when they're like, uh, he's illiterate. Oh, he'll adapt to reading?
yeah. I mean, there are ways to learn how to read through
Yeah.
like not being taught. Like if you see like a warning symbol, you know, and then like it hurts, you're like, all right, that symbol must mean something bad.
Yeah.
But well, that's been the hour. I don't know if you wanted to stay on a little bit longer if you had time.
Not too much. Anything else you want to talk about before we close out?
No, we can do
Or
closing remarks.
okay.
So why don't you give yourself a shout out one more time?
Yeah. Again, I am Bearded Magpie on TikTok. I post a lot of like my most recent series is going through all of the 5e subclasses and saying here's what you should play if you want to do certain things. I also have a series of making Disney characters into D&D characters. And then next week, I am starting my Battle Royale live stream show. That'll be on Twitch. And I'll then be posting it on YouTube and re-premiering it on Twitch again, probably on Saturday. So far, I have two people lined up for that show. I'm looking for probably about two more to participate, but I think it's gonna be a good time. We're gonna focus more on narrative based combat, and like telling a story in our combat, even though it is just a battle royale to the death. So
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
yeah,
Maybe
the first match of the night is going to be just a general level 5 fight. The second one is going to be a whole bunch of clerics trying to prove whose god is superior.
this sounds really fun, actually. um, but yeah, definitely. If you're watching this or listening to this, go check him out. Makes good content. I pretty much like every single one's a home run. So definitely go check him out. As for me, this is Dougie's Dungeon Podcast. You can find me on YouTube, Spotify. You know this if you're already listening to it. But I'm also on TikTok. Doug is a DM. But yeah, that's all I have. Let's get out of here.
All right, thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Good. Thank you for being on.
Yeah.
All right. Adios.